Olá, pessoal! Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite. Bem-vindos a mais uma gravação internacional. E hoje a entrevista é muito legal. Como vocês sabem, há um tempo atrás a gente fez o review do documentário Theaters of War e a gente está hoje com o produtor do documentário. Então, eu vou contar um pouquinho quem é o Dr. Roger Stahl, para vocês conhecerem um pouquinho do que ele faz. Então, o Roger Stahl é PhD pela Universidade Penn State, nos Estados Unidos, ele é norte-americano, e ele é atualmente professor de estudos de comunicação na Universidade da Georgia. Ele estuda retórica, mídia e cultura, e o seu trabalho se concentrou em entender a propaganda e as relações públicas relacionadas à violência estatal, conflito e segurança. Seu livro mais recente, Through the Crosshairs, War, Visual Culture and the Weaponized Gaze, de 2018, traça a história da câmera pela mira de uma arma e examina as maneiras pelas quais o público tem sido cada vez mais convidado a imaginar a guerra através desse olhar da arma. Seu livro anterior, Militainment, Inc., de 2010, mapeia o complexo militar de entretenimento e eu amei esse nome. O Dr. Stahl publicou artigos em várias revistas acadêmicas, como The Quarterly Journal of Speech, Rhetoric and Public Affairs, Critical Studies in Media Communication, e para o público em geral, ele produziu vários documentários, incluindo Militainment, Inc., de 2007, Returning Fire, de 2011, Through the Crosshairs, de 2018, e o mais recente, do ano passado, 2022, é Theaters of War, que vocês nos viram comentando. E o trabalho dele também já foi apresentado na mídia tradicional, como a NPR, The Guardian e Al Jazeera. Então, sem mais delongas, vou trazer aqui o nosso entrevistado. Hello, Dr. Stahl.
It's good to be with you, Thais.
Thank you so much for accepting this interview. We could watch Theaters of War through Vimeo in Brazil. I'm living in Canada now, and I could only watch it when I arrived in Canada because I'm a student, and then I got it through the university.
I see. Yeah, it's mostly available through universities right now, but yeah, there's this one commercial outlet that regular people can use.
Yeah, and we loved it because we were trying to watch it from Brazil, and because it was exactly what we were looking for, and was amazing. So thank you for that. So could you, to start, could you tell us about something about your life and how you became interested in this state and military propaganda, violence and conflict? How did it get into your life?
Well, I've been at this for quite a while, all the way back to probably 2001, 9/11, probably, it changed everything and it changed me. And I watched, as many Americans did, as this exquisite public relations machine went into motion and kind of ended up putting us in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, especially when it came to Iraq, given that it had nothing to do with 9/11, I, as a graduate student at Penn State University, was doing something completely different, but then got just completely absorbed into the anti-war movement. And my research kind of took that turn as well. And I started noticing as I was going through the sort of public relations push that was happening in the United States at the time, that sandwiched between all the news and what seemed to be like video news releases from the Pentagon itself were all these video games that featured scenes from the war to come, from, previous escapades in the Persian Gulf. And, they're reselling the video games along with reselling another war. And so I started looking really hard at the relationship between entertainment and this kind of military-induced public relations. And lo and behold, there's a whole history there. And it was kind of opening up as an avenue for doing Pentagon public relations, a little bit in the 90s, but then really opening up in 2003 in the sort of aftermath of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. So that sent me on this journey that ultimately led to Theaters of War and kind of cracking open this this little secret that everybody knew about to some degree, but nobody had any details. about, which was the Pentagon and CIA's direct involvement in television in Hollywood. People knew that there was an office, but they had no idea the scope or the scale of it, or the details of the kinds of script changes that these offices were making on a daily basis.
Yeah, sure. It was well, actually, the first televised war I remember, because I'm a little older than you, so I was in beginning of college in 1992, and I watched the Gulf War through television. Imagine, I was in Brazil watching it live. I think it was CNN or something. And since then, I was like, whoa, well, and we're still there, right?
And we bombed every day. The United States was bombing Iraq every day
Yeah,
from the
exactly.
90s all the way up until the second invasion. I mean, it didn't stop.
Yeah,
And you probably noticed when watching that, it looked like a miniseries that was produced particularly for TV. And that was the first
exactly.
time that had been done. So you have this guy, this really porous boundary between the entertainment world on the one hand and the selling of conflict on the other.
Yeah, yeah. And then in 2007, you released a documentary, Militainment, about the militarization of the American popular culture. I took it from the, the website, examining how US news coverage has come to resemble Hollywood film, video games, and reality television in its glamorization of war. So you began researching this whole thing. How did you get all that information? Uh, how did you do it? Because I wanted to do it too, but then I said, oh, fortunately you did it first, so I just have to read you and watch you.
Well, it was the time and place for that kind of research because military public relations was experimenting big time in getting into video games and reality TV and all these other venues. So, part of what I was doing was just exploring in depth the whole production process of all of these various projects,
Mm-hmm.
starting before 9/11, there was a few military themed reality TV shows that, the Army would do something here, the Air Force there, and it would be on MTV or somewhere else. And, post 9/11, that just exploded. And so I was in a position before I made Militainment Inc., the movie, and also wrote the book by the same name, to really dig into that world, which was just, it was kind of in its infancy at that point. It's fully developed and matured now, but it was brand new, and so was the word militainment. I mean, people coined that word during that time to describe what was happening. I didn't coin that word, but it was floating around in the media sphere.
Oh, that's perfect. Because I was going to ask you that if you coined that term, because I said it's perfect. It's a perfect definition for the for the situation. So in Militainment Inc., you talk about war as a spectacle, the clean war. I'll just mention the subjects you touched in the document because my audience cannot watch it from Brazil. So I'll just say what you were talking about. So you're talking about war as a spectacle, the clean war, techno fetishism, demonization of the enemy, warring reality TV, sports, toys, and video games, and finally, dissenting voices. So 16 years after the release of the documentary Militainment Inc. and the book, the US is still involved in armed conflicts in other countries. Could you tell our audience some of these topics, well, if not all, that are still relevant to understand international armed conflicts today?
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at 2003 and the aftermath of that big PR push and the U.S. occupation of Iraq, I mean, that was out in the open. And about 2007 or 2008, the U.S. public kind of experienced war fatigue on a grand scale, and so the story about what was happening over in Iraq and Afghanistan really fell off the front page. And it was still happening, obviously. It was
Mhm.
extending, it was extended all the way to 2014 for Iraq, and we still have, a few thousand soldiers there. But, it was just not on the public radar anymore because it had fallen out of the news cycle. So, most of what I talked about in that book and in those films was about how to sell a conflict out in the open. But now I think it's fair to say that, the U.S. involved in, according to the Cost of War project at Brown University, in about 85 different countries, active military operations. And we don't really have a good sense, I'm talking about the public, in the United States of where the military is conducting mainly drone operations and special forces operations around the world. And so, war has in large part gone invisible. And so it's another tactic is to, just not talk about it, not try to justify it, not speak about it directly. And that is the kind of public relations war that's being fought against the U.S. public now. And it's very different. I could talk about some of those, older tactics that you mentioned. You listed a bunch of the sections of Militainment, Inc. You mentioned the clean war, for example, which has, been pretty important since Vietnam. You're going back to the 1991 Gulf War, and you're watching it on TV in Brazil at home on the couch.
Yeah.
And what was the dominant image there? I'm sure you remember it. It's this tracer fire going up above the city of Baghdad.
Exactly.
Yeah, and sort of the green, infrared view of that. And, it looks like a fireworks show or a Christmas tree.
Exactly.
It's clean. There are no bodies present. There are no live or dead bodies anywhere to be seen. It's mainly a view of the air. It's mainly pretty lights. And there is no talk of the collateral damage of that particular campaign. And, excising the body, just erasing the body from the picture was the main task of military planners and also public relations planners for that first Gulf War and for Afghanistan and Iraq afterwards in 2001 and 2003. They're very careful about this. Get the media out of Fallujah before the military goes in was a part of the strategic battle plan, and that's to limit the visibility of bodies.
Yeah. But today we have social media, and in theory, the images can be spread around the world. How do they deal with this sort of information from regular people on the streets?
Well, they do their best. They're talking about the military and soldiers posting unauthorized videos.
No, just regular people in conflict zones. I suppose they can post about it too, right?
Yeah, they can. So it becomes a matter of crowding all that out. So you capture territory, you exclude individuals as best as you can from those conflict zones. We've seen in the past 20, 30 years an increase of targeting of journalists and people who are not specifically embedded with the military. So if you're doing that and you're in a conflict zone, you're at risk, and that's by design. So the embedded reporters get access because they're protected. This was true in Iraq and to a lesser degree in Afghanistan. They get access, and those are the images and the stories that get told through the dominant major media outlets, which are also captured to a large extent. So you do have this sort of like fringe activity. There were Dar Jamal, for example, was a blogger, a kind of social media presence on the ground in Baghdad during the bombing. And he was one of the few people that actually could give a picture of what it's like to be in Baghdad under such heavy fire. And it was horrific, obviously. It was singular because, that's an extremely dangerous thing to do. And he wasn't killed. So there's that kind of fringe social media activity because you can't control all of, this long tail, as they call it, of media activity in our social media driven world. But you can control the channels, the big channels, and you can crowd out or delegitimize or make it so dangerous that, third parties like that, independent voices, don't want to get close to those conflict zones. So that's how they do it.
Do they still have embedded journalists in Ukraine or Israel at this point? or they just gave up this whole strategy?
Well, you've been seeing embedded journalists accompanying Israeli soldiers in Gaza. So that's happening. That's a public relations strategy. So they take journalists along to inspect, so-called Hamas tunnels under hospitals or something like that, in order to lend legitimacy to the Israeli narrative regarding Gaza and their right to bomb hospitals or to raid them. There's no embedded scheme in Ukraine at this point. So the United States is not participating on a formal scale with the Ukrainian army.
Okay, because I was asking you that because I have stopped watching mass media about a decade ago, so I really don't know what they're saying. That's what I was asking you. I know the independent journalists were in different parts of the world bringing the real view on the ground of people living there. And of course, when I don't like conflicts in general, I don't focus on that. But once the conflict in Ukraine started, then I had to go like, oh, okay, let's go for the news outlets that I trust or that have a similar view to mine, and that's definitely not mass media. So it took me a while, but of course I found a Canadian ex-Marine who lives in Ukraine and has a channel there, has been showing everything since 2014. So, but it takes a while to find this sort of information. But people usually follow me because I can find information that most people can not find. And I try to find the other side, the story from the other side, because from my point of view, I'm usually from a nationality that is not involved in the conflict. So I don't really choose a side. It's easier for me to look from outside. In theaters of war, you expose how the military work to shape public perception about the different military institutions, characters, and even historical facts. Which movies do you believe are the most emblematic to this perception shaping?
Gosh, my easy answer would be war films because they directly reference the conflicts themselves, but there haven't been that many of them. I mean, you really count them on one hand, especially the successful ones, and they didn't start to be successful. If you talk about movies that depict the Iraq War, I mean, The Hurt Locker won Best Picture, but it barely broke even in terms of box office receipts. So it was not a commercially successful enterprise. That started off with Pentagon help, but they dropped them halfway because they violated the rules. There's Lone Survivor, which was about Afghanistan, American Sniper, which was about Iraq. American Sniper was, at least on paper, not supported. There might have been some back channel ways that the Pentagon was involved in that film. I just have my suspicions. I don't have any proof. But on paper, that one was not supported. So there's just been a few of these films that have dealt with recent conflicts. And, because they, were so public and they had so much exposure, they, I think, had a huge hand in sort of writing the second draft of history, about those conflicts and really shoring up the narrative and the emotional tenor for, how we're supposed to feel about those conflicts in the American imagination. So, many of these were supported. So I mentioned American Sniper, which was not, but Hurt Locker, which was at first, and Lone Survivor, which was. And, these are essentially celebratory texts. They don't pay any attention to collateral damage or civilians killed in these conflicts. They're all about a central, usually tortured character, a victimized character. So, this recurring narrative of the U.S. or the U.S. soldier as always the victim of the conflicts that we start or the incursions into other people's countries. So, you have this martyred kind of narrative that gets pressed over and over again, and not just, not just these films, but historical dramas like Saving Private Ryan and whatnot. I mean, it's just like part of American war movies is having this martyred character who's either physically martyred or psychologically tortured and martyred, right? And so, the narrative for the U.S. public is that, we don't want to do this, but we have to when we pay the price for doing the right thing, right?
Yeah, because we're the nice guys, and that's the price we have to pay for it,
That's
right?
right. I mean, it's always a story of an imperial power. I mean, consider the Rudyard Kipling poem "White Man's Burden," right? It's all about how we don't want to do it, but we have to, right? We have to do the right thing. We have to go into South and Central America or Africa or wherever it happens to be, India, and do our imperial duty. And that's what the American war movie is largely about these days.
But in the end, it also shapes the narrative in foreign countries because we watch it all over the place, right? And I was surprised, for example, when I watched Argo, and when I saw the real story, I said, "Oh, I can't believe it! I watched the movie and say, oh, wow, that's very interesting, but I never took the time to investigate the real story. I just forgot about it." And I said, I can't believe I did it. Because if I had done, I would have left the movie saying, "Oh, come on.
I mean, believe it or not, that was my experience too with that film. I don't think I saw it in the movie theater, but I walked out of it thinking, okay, it's like a feel-good story about a chapter in which, the United States did something good, which was, save a bunch of hostages. Didn't save them all, but saved some of them. It didn't seem problematic to me. And Ben Affleck has got a history of being a semi-conscious guy, and so my radar wasn't up either. But you look, and my process of going through that film and looking at the documents was sort of like your process of watching the film and what came out of that, which is the CIA wanted in from the beginning. Their goal, and even before the film was made, they were pitching this story to Hollywood. So Ben Affleck picked up this story about saving, those 6 hostages among the, I think it was like 75 that were kept for the 444 days total, but they saved 6 of them. So they wanted to put the focus on that rather than the, catastrophe, the bungled job that led up to the Iran hostage crisis, which the CIA was largely responsible for. They were responsible for, the 1954 coup that set in motion a lot of resentment that ultimately manifested in the 1979, Iran hostage crisis. And, none of that is in the film. There's no responsibility taken for any of that.
Exactly.
It's all about the CIA saving the day, and they only saved the day for 6 people out of 75. And so it really wasn't that significant, but it seems very significant in that film. So it was, it's a public relations move to rewrite that probably the most embarrassing episode in CIA history, and it worked really well. I mean, what do any of us remember of the Iran hostage crisis? We remember Argo.
Yeah, exactly. Remember Argo, right? The movie.
That is our memory. Yep.
That's how you implant false memories. As simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, at least selective memories. I mean, there's nothing in that film is blatantly false.
False, because then we would have noticed.
Yeah, we would have noticed.
Yeah, but you just say, ignore this part and that part, and keep that one. It's so nice. Ben Affleck's here. Just pay attention.
Yeah.
That's it.
And a rescue story like that, there's the martyr story, and that's a big one, but rescue stories too are big for imperial powers because, it doesn't always work out. Vietnam didn't work out. Iraq didn't work out. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was really messy. The Iran hostage crisis largely didn't work out. The Battle of Mogadishu, on which Black Hawk Down was based, didn't work out. And when something embarrassing happens, like the Battle of Mogadishu in Somalia in 1993, we go through like 7 or 8 years of wringing our hands about it, or at least policy planners do, and wondering what can be done about this. And the movies come to the rescue. And what do they come
Yeah.
to the rescue with? A rescue narrative. So, you send in your boys, you rescue the troops or the hostages or whatever it happens to be, and that becomes the story of success that supplants the earlier memory of, catastrophe and
Yeah.
a bungled job.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's well, amazing. And you know what? It's interesting because I don't know exactly when this, let's say, military infiltration started, but what I know is that at least in South America and in Brazil, people really believed the narrative that the North Americans are fighting for freedom all over the world. We really believe that. Okay, I don't know how we got to that impression, but then since the 90s, I think, some information started coming out from local media showing CIA involvement in local operations and regime changes and things like that. So the rest of the world, at least in South America, we began saying, wait, there's shady stuff here. And once you start with that, and then people started saying, I think this war is more about oil than freedom somewhere. And once you pick up that, it becomes a trend in public opinion. So I remember watching a poll during what was that? I don't remember if it was the Gulf War or Iraq, but people outside from other countries were polled about why do you think they're at war, and most people said, yeah, it's for oil. So at least outside, it's pretty
Yeah.
clear.
Well, I remember, being part of anti-war demonstrations in the United States leading up to the Iraq War, and you had a huge banner that said "No war for oil," and people in minivans would drive by and say it's not about oil, you
Yeah,
know. And now it's just common sense that obviously it was. I mean, once public opinion tanked as it did, then these alternative explanations of why the United States was there start to creep in, and now it's just nothing more than common sense. The United States went in there for oil, and even the clips about George W. Bush, you know, and before him, his father,
yeah,
talking about the centrality of oil in that region to the U.S. economy, start to make appearances as well in the media, and it becomes the story we tell about that. So that's the sort of critical story that creeps in when occupations run too long, and then the public relations machine has to step in and fight those perceptions in any way it can. And one of the ways that I'm obviously interested in is through the entertainment industry and the stories we tell in Hollywood and TV.
hmm and then it's interesting the way you show that the military are not really against dictators as long as they work with them. They are only against them when they do not work with the military, and then they're ready to be changed, right? Something.
There's some dramatic examples of that. I mean, South America, Augusto Pinochet, for example.
Yeah,
Like you can't
absolutely.
imagine a more hardline anti-democratic figure than Pinochet. And yet the documents just came out, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, that showed that the Nixon administration and Henry Kissinger in particular were directly involved after decades of denying any U.S. involvement in Chile, directly involved in the overthrow
Yeah,
of Allende and the installation of Pinochet, and killing 30,000 people in the process. So it's not about supporting the good guys. I mean, the most dramatic example is Saddam Hussein, which we supported on
yeah, yeah,
right to the 1991 invasion. I
Amazing.
mean, he was our guy fighting the Iranians in the Middle East. And when he went rogue, that's when he had to go. The same thing could be said for Manuel Noriega. He was trained in the United States at the School of the Americas, which is right down the street from me. And he was our guy in Central America. And he
Yeah.
went rogue and started making alliances with, more independently minded Central and South American leaders. And he had to go. And so that was Operation Just Cause in 1989. So yeah, it's not about supporting the good guys. It's making sure that we have a long list of client states and puppet dictators that are willing to do the bidding of the United States around the world. So it's colonialism by another name, perhaps.
Yeah, and we had that in Brazil during our military regime. There was CIA influence, direct influence, and we kind of knew that. So it wasn't a surprise when we heard about Pinochet and other leaders in South America, because we have more access to their stories. We have people moving from country to country, so we kind of know that. But one thing that I wanted your opinion on that, because I don't know how to deal with it. Because when from outside we say the US, it feels like we have two different entities. We have like the government and the military agencies with a certain agenda, and we have like people, ordinary people that may buy into that story, but not necessarily. And saying the two are the same, I think it's also risky, because you have situations in countries in conflict that people think the American people in general agree with what is done. How can we separate? Do you see it as a single thing, a separate thing? How can we see that from a foreign perspective?
Yeah, I hope people don't conflate people like me with the agencies and the leaders that are responsible for prosecuting these conflicts. Largely the American people need to be sold on the conflict to some degree. So mass demonstrations need to be staved off. And so, when policy leaders decide that it's necessary to go into, for the benefit usually of huge business interests that are putting pressure on the government, they see that it's highly profitable to use regular taxpayer money to police situations around the globe and make it safe for global capital to enter in and do business. That works out really well. And Smedley Butler in the early 20th century called war a massive. He wrote a book called War is a Racket, and he talked about it being a massive transfer of wealth from the taxpayer to the rich, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a free police force. So the American people need to be convinced to some degree that those incursions into other countries militarily are in line with their interests, because they're in most cases not. So that's when public relations kicks in and tells an alternate story. It's not about oil; it's about making the world safe for democracy, or saving brown women from brown men. In the case of Afghanistan, right? It's a feminist war of some kind.
Whatever excuses works, right?
Right, that's right. They'll use whatever works. If we look at public poll numbers going up to the first Iraq invasion, which some people might view as more legitimate than the second one, because Saddam Hussein did invade illegally. He did invade Kuwait, and the global community was outraged about that. The American people, even though the Bush administration, the first Bush administration, was really pushing for U.S. involvement, and it was a huge public relations campaign. They threw a ton of money at it. The American people were split 50-50. And it wasn't until the war started that you have what some in the media call the Baghdad bounce, where it jumps from 49% supporting to 75 or 80. And the same thing happened with the second Iraq invasion. It was split 50-50. And so, you have a level of trust that, the president has got inside information about weapons of mass destruction or whatever. And that accounts for a large portion of that. You can't blame people for being information low deciders. And then you have a vast portion of the U.S. population that's also very skeptical. But then, about a 20-30% swing of people who want to support the military once it pulls the trigger and once it enters the country and is conducting military operations formally. So, there's huge gaps in all kinds of issues, not just military, between the American people and those that are crafting the policy. At the same time, public relations effort is necessary to stave off what might otherwise be a massive kind of insurrection on the part of the American people if they did not buy what policy leaders were selling.
And do you believe at some point it will happen? Because at this point, the latest conflicts were very expensive. And part of the American population needs the help that was sent to foreign countries. Do you think at some point they will say, enough, we should invest it in American population instead of meddling with others' business?
I don't think the American people, and especially my students, when I bring this up, don't know what we're spending on the military budget. They have no sense of how much of total spending that is. It's about half. It's more than half. And they have no sense of what we ought to be spending, what's reasonable to spend. So, the American military has a budget that's more than the next dozen countries combined.
Exactly.
It's near, or if you count the actual conflicts that we're engaging in, it's more than half of total global military spending. And we have 6% of the population. And when I present that to my students, who should be educated about these things, it's not Joe Blow off the street. These are people that are at a rather selective, public institution, a flagship university. They are completely in the dark. They're surprised. They don't know how exceptional the United States is on that count.
Let's talk a little about dissent and censorship. During the planning and production of all your documentaries and books, were you ever censored or threatened in any way? Did you have to suppress some of the content to be able to release them?
Well, the university has been really good at supporting me, and they have not asked questions about the project or put up any roadblocks. So to the extent that we have free inquiry in the United States and tenure, that was a big part of it. Tenure is going away, and with it, a certain degree of academic freedom is going away. I was in a position to be protected. That said, I get this question all the time, has the CIA knocked on your door? Are your phone? Have you gotten threatening letters in the mail, or strange encounters? No, I have not. The only thing that even comes close to maybe a direct response from any of these agencies, they've been eerily quiet in the face of this film, is some bad reviews on IMDb. That's awfully, they're just so bad and so ill-informed that I wonder if they're relying, they're relying on public ignorance or something like that to get a message across, seeing some public relations value and bringing down my IMDb rating. I don't know, but it could be just disgruntled people who don't like the film too. I'm not trying to flatter myself, but I haven't really run into any problems like that. The film has only circulated on the educational market though so far, and that's really limited. We got a big grant from a donor who liked the film and wanted to see it on Netflix, so he dropped a large sum of money in the laps of my distributors, and we put the film through a big legal process of clearing 450 items for fair use. So this is the copyright problem with doing a film like this. And we got it through the legal process, and we're buying insurance for it, which, we got turned down at every
Of course.
chance that we took on that. A few insurers would, take a risk with us. So we got insurance, and it's going to be going out on the commercial market. And that's when it's going to get interesting, because that's when it'll have
Wow.
wide distribution, and maybe these agencies that have not really perked up and taken notice, maybe they will then.
Wow. And that's for theaters of war?
Yeah. Theaters.
Yeah, great. Oh, so from our side, it's already in Vimeo. We would like to donate Portuguese subtitles. So if you are interested, just let us know, because we do that when we think something is important. We have a team of translators, and we do that for all the content.
Oh my
We think
goodness. Wow, that is so generous of you. That would be lovely. We got to take you up
we
on
love
that.
to do that. Great. Just a curiosity, did you ever place a FOIA request to find out what the agencies have on you, like Tom Sacker, when he find out he was vexatious request or something like that? And I love the way he owned it, and he printed a T-shirt with that. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, you're telling the story for those that haven't seen the film. One of the colleagues of mine, Tom Secker, who did the most FOIA requests. He's putting in hundreds and hundreds of these, and he did one on himself, just because he's curious, and also maybe a little paranoid. I don't know, like the rest of us, but wanted to know if the British and American governments had a file on him, and indeed they did. And he ran into some emails that from the FOIA agencies that called him a vexatious requester. So he was so proud of that he made a T-shirt, and that's in the film. But no, I have not done that for myself. Every time I put in a CIA FOIA request, there's a page that says, do you want to do this for yourself? You can put your name in and see what the CIA file is on you. And I think it's, in part because it's advantageous in my line of work to not know what they have on me, so I don't have to think about it. Because if I knew, then maybe I would think twice about some of the actions that I'm taking. But maybe one day I'll go down that route, but I haven't yet.
There are a lot of people working on disclosure of what they call government having extraterrestrial ships and reverse engineering and all that. The one I know best is Dr. Stephen Greer, who's been working with that for the past, 30 years.
I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any information about that? Because he's also fighting another branch, well, the same military forces, but with a very different subject, so that information come out to the public. Did you ever see anything about it?
Well, when I go to the FOIA page, the first thing you see is if you're, a message from whatever agency it happens to be, the Navy. If you're interested in documentation on UAPs, you're going to have to wait a lot longer, because there's a huge backlog of people making those requests. I have not made any of those requests. I'm tangentially interested, as I think everyone is at this stage, in what's going on. And my go-to explanation is for why the military, the Air Force and the Navy in particular, why they're suddenly going public with a lot of this stuff, is probably the same explanation that people have said for years about Area 51. It's like a cover story for something else, some other research project. I mean, the aliens could be here. They could be warning us about nuclear catastrophe or something like that. Who knows? But I remain agnostic on that point. We do have a number of documents regarding fictional alien invasion scenarios. So if you want to make a UFO movie like Independence Day, or there's a bunch in the 50s that we have documentation on, the military has to be very careful about how it approaches those films. And they certainly do not want to be seen as endorsing the idea that, they have secret information about aliens. And so they often turn down these requests. unless they can see some big public relations value in supporting a film like this. So, for example, in Independence Day, there was talk about a cover-up and a facility for investigating alien crafts and bodies at Area 51, and they just had the filmmakers take it out. We're not going to have any mention of Area 51 as a government cover-up in this film that we are going to be cooperating with. And you can see why they would do that. That seems reasonable to me. I mean, they're kind of in the business of not wanting to give oxygen to those sorts of narratives. And at least in my case, those narratives aren't credible enough or been, afforded enough proof to question the motives of the public relations entity that is working with the filmmakers in that case. So I'm not worried about that. But you see this pattern of constantly shooting down UFO movies and not wanting to work with them for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's also an urban legend that Kubrick was coerced into filming the man's arrival on the moon. Yeah, the moon landing. Did you ever get any information about that? If that's remotely true or just like urban legend?
Yeah, I think that's an urban legend territory. I don't have any information about that. It seems clear that we landed on the moon and that wasn't faked. So no comment on that.
That's okay. So how do you see the reaction from academics, mass media, and Hollywood to the heavy influence of the military on content production? Do you think it's a hot topic, or is it being discredited and people from the industry, they just don't pay attention to it?
Well, when I made this film, I thought, people in the industry would start coming out of the woodwork, and they did to some extent, but it's really hard to get anybody with any clout to talk. Because they're putting their own business model on the line if they do. Oliver Stone was the only one that really wanted to come forward, is very interested in speaking on camera. But I contacted, or at least tried, to the extent my contacts would allow me to get through. It's very difficult to reach some of these people. But I went through all these agencies and whatnot and pitched potential interviews to different people that I thought would be sympathetic or maybe retired. And they're out there. David Robb, who wrote the book Operation Hollywood in 1994, he worked for Variety magazine and Hollywood Reporter, and was a Hollywood, journalist. And he was able to talk to a bunch of people that had direct experience with the approval process and the script revision process. But I had personally in my group had less success doing that. And I think generally, the folks in Hollywood, my sense is that they get snapshots of this process, but they don't see the big picture and they don't understand how systemic it is. So they don't really have a sense of how important or big a deal it is. And that was the case for Oliver Stone. He wasn't really clued in. I mean, as widely read and as, critical as he is of all kinds of government public relations activity and, selling conflicts and whatnot, he was surprised. So I don't think that people in the industry really have a good sense of what the stakes are. And if they do, and if they have worked with the military before and gone through script revision process, they don't want to talk about that. It compromises their own persona as an artist. It jeopardizes the ability to get government help in the future. It compromises their own revenues. If the word got out among audiences that this was happening, people would stop buying tickets. They would stop, lauding the film if they see it as a recruitment poster. So, there's all kinds of risks involved. And that's why the industry folks don't want to come forward.
Yeah, sure. But are there today ways to get out of this control and have content produced without having to worry about their approval when you want to talk about conflicts and wars and weapons? Or
I
not
mean,
really?
they could easily make films without government approval and government assistance, easily. It would cost more money, which is why they do it. They
Yeah.
spend a few $1 million more. The first Top Gun probably wouldn't have been made. They would have to use other techniques. And there's a few films like that. Black Hawk Down probably couldn't have been made in the way that it was. They would have told a different story about that conflict that didn't involve,
Hmm.
helicopters flying around
Yeah.
aerial stunts and stuff like that. So, Hollywood as a dream factory would still keep churning them out. They'd be telling different stories that wouldn't be censored and massaged by professional military public relations people in Washington. And the movies would probably be better because of it. Is there a way out of it? Certainly, we could abolish the office, and it's come precariously close to being abolished and defunded at several points in the past. And the industry, in fact, not so much the folks in the military, but the industry, the MPAA, which was headed by Jack Valenti for a long time, would regularly go to Congress and lobby for the continuing of this kind of help. So the industry is pushing for it as well. But, it's not unimaginable that it would be abolished at some point with enough public pressure. Otherwise, and I think this is just the least that we could do, is mandate, like they do with commercial entities, that if you are a paid sponsor of commercial programming in the United States, then somewhere in the either the beginning, I think it has to be no, it doesn't have to be at the beginning, but at the end of the show, there's got to be a title card that says sponsored by
Correct.
blank.
Hmm.
And that's just in the interest of transparency. And if the movie theater, along with the FBI warning at the front, had a title card that said the CIA had direct control over this script, or the Department of
Yeah.
Defense, that would change the entire calculation. And
Yeah.
and suddenly it would probably be a badge of honor for filmmakers to make war movies or military representations that did not have that
Have that.
at the front of the film.
Yeah. Sure. Sure. Yeah. Very interesting. Um, I'm thinking about the question here because when you started studying this sort of thing, at certain point, you may or might have received a job offer from the other side. Uh, did it ever happen? Did they? Because I mean, thinking the way they think, you would be a good hire.
It's like finding a hacker and then hiring him on for the NSA or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Did it ever happen to you?
Well, I do know at this point a lot about the way military public relations works. I suppose I
Right?
could monetize that if I wanted to go to the dark side at some point. So if anybody's listening, send me an invitation. I could use the money. No, that has never happened. I really have trouble foreseeing a scenario like that, although it's sort of standard operating procedure, for an entity like that to at least try that before the smear campaign starts.
Exactly. So if you get a job offer, oops, what's next?
That's right. Yeah, I gotta, there's a carrot and a stick always, right? I have to
Yeah,
watch out for the stick if
exactly.
I turn down the carrot.
Yeah. Do you have a message for the audience and would like to tell them how to find more about your work?
Well, the most public-facing piece of work, as you mentioned, is Theaters of War right now. That came out in 2022, and it's just circulating on the educational market. So if you're not plugged into college or university, and most of them do, but if that college or university does not have the Canopy streaming service, which is kind of like the Netflix of higher ed,
Mhm.
then it's going to be hard to find. You could try to find it on Vimeo. My distributor, even though they just work with the educational market, decided In this case, we're going to have a small retail outlet
Yeah.
too. So if you have university access, go to Canopy. If you don't, go to Vimeo, and it's available for, I think, $5 to watch. I decided to make the movie before I wrote the book, in this case. And so it's, in addition to making a documentary, it's been a 3-year-long research project that
Wow.
has been pretty intense. So I'm writing the book right now, and hopefully it'll probably be called Theaters of War as well. It'll be the definitive document, because now we have about 60,000 pages of internal documents,
Yeah.
stack of stuff on roughly 2,500, 2,600 CIA and Pentagon supported films. And there's a lot to talk about there. Just 5 years ago, we did not have that information. We
Wow.
just didn't have it. And so, a number of scholars that were working in this field, they could only guess. They thought, maybe it's 100, 150, 200 films that were subject to this process. And they didn't know the ins and outs of it. They didn't have evidence of, script changes that were made on particular productions. And so they knew very little about it. And suddenly we know a lot. I mean, suddenly it's just an explosion of documentation. So we're sifting through all that right now. And I anticipate in the next 2 years, the book will be out. But the snapshot of what, kind of coming attractions for the book is the film. And that's how I structured it.
Oh, nice. And do you have any new projects at the moment, or the book is your main project right now?
It's going to be the book, yeah. And that won't, I mean, I do a lot of journal essays and things like that, which your audience probably doesn't have access to. But I'm an academic, and that's what I'm doing as well. So we're doing another one on new documents that came out with regard to the second Bush administration's efforts after 9/11 to make inroads in Hollywood. So some of you may
Wow.
recall that after 9/11, just that October, right after September 11th, Karl Rove and crew held a series of meetings with top Hollywood executives about what they could do to aid the war effort. And we knew that meeting happened, or that series of meetings happened, but we didn't know who was there and what they said,
Mhm.
what the Bush administration requested. So I'm writing an essay about the documents we just uncovered
Wow.
regarding those meetings as well. So that's the kind of thing I'm working on, and mainly it's the book. Mainly it's doing interviews about the documentary and stuff like that. But this will be a research project that lasts another couple of years for me.
Okay. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if you need anything else from us, just let us know, and we'll talk about the Portuguese subtitles later. Okay.
I appreciate the time you spent and talking about this
Thank you
topic
so
that's
much.
near and dear to my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.